When we hear the word development, we often picture charts rising, skylines growing taller, roads stretching farther than before. But development first enters our lives in quieter ways, long before it appears in speeches or reports. It shows up in ordinary mornings and familiar streets. It is there when the tap runs without hesitation, when the light stays on through the evening, when a bus arrives close to the time we expect it to. These moments feel small, almost forgettable, yet they quietly shape how secure and settled life feels. Growth, on the other hand, often announces itself loudly. New buildings, faster vehicles, busier markets. It speaks in the language of speed and scale. We notice it because it changes what we see, what we hear, and how crowded our days become. Progress feels different. It is slower, sometimes invisible. It is felt when a journey becomes less exhausting, when a workplace becomes more humane, when a neighborhood feels safer after sunset. Progress settles into life rather than rushing past it. At night, when the noise of the day fades, these differences become clearer. Growth asks how much more we can produce, build, and consume. Progress quietly asks whether life has become easier to live or merely faster to endure. We may earn more than before, yet feel less certain about tomorrow. We may live in taller buildings, yet feel more distant from those around us. In these moments, development feels incomplete, like a story that kept moving but forgot to deepen. Daily life becomes the real test. Not the promise of what is coming, but the experience of what already exists. Whether time feels respected, whether dignity feels intact, whether people feel seen rather than counted. Sometimes what we ignore matters more than what we celebrate. The tiredness that lingers despite success. The silence of those who adapt quietly while others move ahead. The spaces where growth arrived, but care did not follow. Development, when reduced to movement alone, can forget direction. It can mistake expansion for improvement. Yet lived progress always carries a sense of arrival, even if modest. Feeling that something is not just bigger, but better aligned with life. This is why development cannot belong only to planners or pages. It belongs to kitchens, footpaths, classrooms, and late-night conversations. It belongs to how people feel at the end of the day, when no one is measuring anything anymore. Tonight, as we sit with this idea, it may help to listen closely to our own lives, to notice where growth has touched us and where progress has quietly passed us by. In that space between the two, the true meaning of development begins to reveal itself. When people speak of economic growth, they are often pointing to a single question. Is the country producing more than it did before? More goods, more services, more activity? Growth, in this sense, is about the overall movement of the economy forward. One common way to describe this movement is through GDP growth. In simple terms, it is a broad attempt to capture the total value of what people collectively create in a year. It does not see faces or stories, only the sum of effort. Imagine a very large household where millions of people are working, buying, selling, and building. GDP tries to add all of that together into one number. When that number rises, we say the economy is growing. When it slows, concern quietly spreads. Growth also comes from different parts of life expanding at once. Farms producing more, factories making new things, offices offering services that did not exist earlier. This is what people mean by sectoral expansion, when multiple engines push the economy together. In India's story, this idea of growth gained special importance after economic reforms opened doors to markets and competition. Growth became a signal of arrival, a way to show that the country was finally moving faster, catching up with the world. For many, growth promised opportunity. More jobs, more choices, more chances to improve one's life. It felt like a release from long waiting, from scarcity that shaped earlier decades. Speed itself became a kind of hope. Over time, growth began to dominate conversations about development. If growth was strong, confidence followed. If growth slowed, anxiety crept in. It became a shared reference point, even for those who never used the word themselves. India has lived through periods when growth felt energetic and optimistic. Cities expanded, consumption increased, aspirations widened. There was a sense that tomorrow would naturally be better than today, simply because the economy was moving forward. There were also quieter phases, when growth slowed and uncertainty returned. Jobs felt harder to find, spending became cautious, and optimism softened. These slowdowns reminded people how closely their everyday security was tied to larger economic rhythms. Growth, however, is not something people touch directly. No one experiences GDP itself. What they experience are its echoes: a new shop opening, a factory closing, a longer commute, a higher bill, or a better opportunity appearing unexpectedly. Because growth measures total output, it does not ask who benefits first or who waits longer. It counts success even if it is uneven. This is why growth can feel impressive on paper, while life on the ground feels unchanged. Still, growth matters. Without it, resources feel tighter and choices narrower. Governments struggle, businesses hesitate, households postpone dreams. Growth creates space, even if it does not decide how that space is filled. In India, growth came to symbolize momentum itself, a sign that the country was no longer standing still, that it was participating in global flows. Technology and ideas. Growth became part of national self-confidence. Yet growth also simplified the story. It reduced complex lives into trends, curves, and expectations. It encouraged comparisons, faster versus slower, rising versus falling, often without pausing to ask how people were actually adjusting. For many families, growth meant longer working hours, migration to unfamiliar cities, and new pressures alongside new income. Economic expansion brought change, but not always comfort. Progress had to be negotiated, not assumed. Growth explains motion, not meaning. It tells us how fast the economy is moving, not whether people feel steadier. It can describe expansion without describing satisfaction, increase without reassurance. Understanding growth in human terms means seeing it as a condition, not a conclusion. A background force that shapes options but does not choose outcomes. It opens doors, but does not decide who can walk through them easily. As this conversation continues, growth will remain an important part of development's language. But it is only one chapter. To understand development fully, we must look beyond how much we produce and gently ask how life feels while producing it. If growth is about movement, progress is about condition. It asks not how fast life is changing, but how well it is holding together. Progress listens closely to bodies, minds, and relationships, not just to markets or momentum. In many places, economic expansion arrives before human comfort does. Roads appear faster than clinics. Buildings rise before classrooms improve. The economy moves ahead, while daily life tries to catch its breath behind it. Health is often the first place where this gap becomes visible. People may earn more than before, yet still travel far for care. Treatment exists, but access feels uneven. Illness still carries fear, not only because of pain, but because of uncertainty. Education tells a similar story. Schools may multiply, enrollment may rise, yet learning remains fragile. Children attend classes, but understanding comes slowly. Progress pauses when presence is mistaken for preparation and attendance for opportunity. Nutrition lives quietly in this space between growth and progress. Plates may be fuller than before, but not always balanced. Hunger becomes less visible, yet weakness persists. Bodies carry the marks of shortages that income alone does not erase. Dignity is harder to notice, but easier to feel missing. It shows up in how people are spoken to, how services respond, how mistakes are forgiven or punished. Economic expansion does not automatically teach systems to be humane. When people talk about human development, they are often pointing to these lived experiences. Whether children are actually learning, whether illness is met with care or delay, whether people feel protected, not just productive. In many communities, progress feels uneven, even within the same street. One household moves ahead confidently, another hesitates with the same opportunities nearby. Growth creates possibilities, but progress depends on how evenly those possibilities are carried. Healthcare access often reflects this imbalance. Facilities exist, yet distance, cost, or awareness keeps them out of reach. The system stands ready, but the path toward it remains uncertain for many who need it most. Learning outcomes follow a similar pattern. Years of schooling increase, but understanding varies sharply. Education becomes a journey with uneven steps, where some move smoothly, while others stumble quietly without being noticed. Economic growth can absorb these differences without slowing down. It averages them into comfort. Progress, however, cannot ignore them. It notices who is falling behind, not because of effort, but because of starting point. This is where progress begins to feel personal. It asks whether growth has softened life or simply intensified it, whether people feel more capable or just more pressure to keep up. For many, daily routines reveal the truth. Long waits at hospitals, overcrowded classrooms, jobs that pay better but demand more endurance. Growth brings change, but progress asks whether that change feels supportive. The language of indicators tries to capture this quietly, not through celebration, but through comparison. It asks how children grow, how long people live, how securely families function. It tries to listen to outcomes, not announcements. Yet, even these measures struggle to fully describe dignity. They can hint at access, but not always at experience. A service can exist without being welcoming. A system can function without being fair. Progress requires patience that growth often resists. It demands investment where returns are slow and subtle. Better learning takes time. Strong health systems grow carefully. Nutrition improves generation by generation, not quart by quart. In India's journey, this tension has remained constant. The economy has often moved faster than social comfort. Each phase of expansion has reopened the same quiet question: who is being carried along and who is being asked to wait? Progress does not reject growth. It simply refuses to be rushed by it. It insists that development be felt in the body, the mind, and the home, not just in confidence or comparison. As we shift our attention from growth to progress, the conversation slows naturally. It becomes less about how much more is possible, and more about how much better life has actually become, especially for those who rarely speak first. Jobs are where growth finally meets people. Not in headlines or projections, but in the simple question asked at home each morning: what work will I do today, and will it be enough? Livelihoods turn abstract movement into lived meaning. An economy can grow without creating enough work. This is often called jobless growth, but the phrase sounds colder than the experience. It feels like movement without invitation, expansion without room for everyone to step in. Shops open, companies expand, profits rise, yet many continue searching. The work exists somewhere, but not always where people are, or in forms they can easily access. Growth moves ahead, while jobs arrive slowly. For millions in India, work lives outside formal definitions. The informal workforce is vast, stretching across streets, farms, homes, and workshops. These jobs keep life running, yet rarely come with security, stability, or recognition. Informal work is not always temporary. For many, it is lifelong. Earnings fluctuate, hours stretch, and protection feels distant. Growth may increase demand, but it does not always improve conditions. People work more, not necessarily better. Underemployment quietly hides inside employment numbers. People have jobs, but not enough hours, not enough pay, not enough use of their abilities. Skills remain unused. Ambitions paused, potential folded into routine survival. A trained graduate driving a cab. A skilled artisan selling cheaply. A capable worker stuck repeating tasks far below their capacity. These stories are common, not dramatic, and often accepted as normal. Youth aspirations sit at the center of this tension. Young people are more educated than previous generations, more connected, more aware. Their expectations rise faster than opportunities, creating pressure that growth alone cannot release. They search not just for income, but for meaning. Work that respects effort, value, roles that allow learning, stability that makes planning possible. When these remain scarce, frustration grows quietly, even when the economy seems active. Skill mismatch deepens this gap. Education and training often move in one direction, while job demand moves in another. People prepare for futures that do not fully arrive, while industries look for skills that remain unavailable. This mismatch creates strange contradictions. Vacancies exist alongside unemployment. Employers search, workers wait, and the connection fails somewhere in between. Growth continues, but coordination lags behind. Livelihoods also carry social weight. Work decides where people live, how they are treated, how secure they feel. A job is not just income, it is identity, routine, and reassurance. When work is unstable, life becomes fragile. Decisions are postponed. Health is neglected. Education is interrupted. Growth may offer possibilities, but insecure livelihoods make those possibilities feel risky. Many families survive through multiple small jobs. A little here, a little there. Flexibility keeps them afloat, but exhaustion follows. Progress, in this context, feels like rest as much as advancement. Women often carry a hidden burden within this landscape. Their work is frequent, essential, and unpaid or underpaid. Growth rarely counts it properly, yet households depend on it completely. Migration becomes another bridge between growth and people. Workers move toward opportunity, leaving familiarity behind. Cities absorb labor quickly, but belonging comes slowly. Livelihoods improve, but roots remain unsettled. Job creation takes time and care. It requires matching skills, protecting dignity, and valuing stability. Growth can accelerate activity, but livelihoods need design, not assumption. This is why jobs sit at the heart of development. They translate expansion into security, ambition into confidence. Without them, growth feels distant, like a train passing through without stopping. As we reflect on livelihoods, the picture becomes clearer. Growth may raise the ceiling, but jobs determine the floor on which people stand. And for development to feel real, that floor must feel firm, fair, and reachable. As development unfolds, it rarely spreads evenly. Some paths smooth quickly while others remain rough. Inequality enters quietly, not as a sudden break, but as a gradual widening of distance between people moving at different speeds. Income differences grow without announcing themselves. A few earn far more than before, while many improve only slightly. Life does not worsen for everyone, yet the gap between comfort and strain becomes easier to feel, harder to ignore. Wealth concentrates in places where opportunity gathers. Assets multiply faster than wages. Security compounds for some, while others rely only on monthly effort. Growth rewards position as much as participation. Uneven development often follows geography. Certain regions attract investment, infrastructure, and attention. Others wait longer, watching neighbors move ahead. Progress becomes something observed from a distance, rather than experienced directly. Cities become symbols of possibility. They promise jobs, services, and visibility. Rural areas provide food, labor, and continuity, yet often receive slower returns. The divide is not just economic, but emotional. In villages, development feels measured by access. Roads, schools, clinics arrive later, sometimes partially. Life adapts patiently, but aspiration thins. Growth may pass nearby without fully stopping. Urban life carries its own imbalance. Opportunity clusters in pockets, while scarcity survives alongside abundance. Proximity does not guarantee access. Inequality hides behind shared skylines. Migration reflects this unevenness. People move not because they want to leave, but because staying feels limiting. Movement becomes survival, not choice. Cities absorb hope along with labor. Gender gaps cut across all these spaces. Women often work as hard, sometimes harder, yet earn less and remain less secure. Their contributions are essential, but recognition arrives slowly. Access to education, health, and work narrows quietly for women. Responsibilities multiply, choices shrink. Growth does not automatically rebalance power or expectation. Progress requires intention. Unequal access shapes futures early. Children growing up in different circumstances begin the race at different points. Effort matters, but starting position matters too. Growth does not erase these differences on its own. Opportunities cluster where networks exist. Information travels faster in some circles. Confidence builds where success is visible. Elsewhere, potential remains cautious, unsure whether the system will respond. Inequality is not always loud. It does not always provoke protest. Often, it settles into routine. People adjust expectations downward, learning to want less rather than demand more. This quiet adjustment is easy to miss. Growth continues. Headlines stay positive, yet lived progress feels selective. Development becomes something people hear about more than feel. Uneven development also shapes trust. When benefits appear distant or unequal, belief weakens. Institutions feel less responsive. Participation turns passive. Growth may continue, but confidence erodes. Yet inequality is not a verdict. It is a signal. It tells us where connections are weak, where access has stalled, where progress needs patience and care. Addressing imbalance does not mean slowing growth. It means guiding it. Ensuring that expansion carries people along, rather than passing over them. As we sit with this idea, inequality asks for attention, not blame. It invites listening, not accusation. Development deepens when it narrows distance, not just when it increases height. In the quiet of this conversation, uneven development reminds us of a simple truth. Growth may change the landscape, but progress is measured by how evenly people can walk upon it. Poverty is often spoken of as a number, but it is lived as a condition. It is felt in uncertainty, in fragile routines, in choices made carefully, because mistakes cost more when margins are thin. Over the years, many families have moved away from extreme deprivation. Life has become slightly steadier for some. Fewer days of hunger, more regular work, better access to essentials. Poverty has not vanished, but its shape has shifted. This slow movement matters. It tells a story of gradual improvement rather than sudden transformation. Poverty reduction often happens quietly, household by household, without celebration. Yet vulnerability remains close. A health shock, a lost job, a failed crop can undo years of progress. Poverty today is often less about permanent lack and more about constant risk. This is where the role of the state enters daily life, not as an abstract authority, but as a presence that appears when markets fall short. In moments of stress, people look toward systems designed to soften impact. Social safety nets exist to catch those who slip. They do not promise comfort, only survival. Their purpose is not to elevate, but to prevent collapse. In this way, they quietly support dignity. Food security has been central to this effort. The assurance that basic nourishment will be available reduces fear, even when income is uncertain. Hunger, once widespread, has become more contained, though not eliminated. Access to food through public systems shapes everyday confidence. It allows families to plan beyond the next meal. It stabilizes children's routines. It turns survival into something less exhausting. Over time, welfare has also changed form. Support increasingly moves directly to individuals rather than through layers of intermediaries. Assistance arrives as money instead of material, offering flexibility along with responsibility. Direct transfers alter the relationship between the state and the citizen. Help feels more personal, less visible, less stigmatized. People choose how to use support rather than adapt to rigid provision. At the same time, access remains uneven. Documentation, awareness, and digital comfort vary widely. Some navigate systems smoothly, others struggle quietly. Inclusion becomes a process, not a guarantee. The state in this role balances scale with sensitivity. It must reach millions without losing sight of individuals. Errors matter because they affect trust, not just efficiency. Welfare is often misunderstood as charity. In reality, it functions as insurance for society. It spreads risk across the collective, acknowledging that markets alone cannot absorb every shock. Poverty reduction is not only about income. It is about stability. Predictable access to food, healthcare, and support allows families to invest in the future, rather than constantly recover from the past. Critically, welfare does not replace growth. It complements it. Growth creates resources. Welfare decides how shock-resistant lives can be while growth unfolds unevenly. The presence of the state in welfare is most visible when it works quietly, when food arrives without struggle, when support reaches accounts without delay, when survival does not require negotiation. At the same time, welfare systems carry limits. They cannot substitute for strong jobs, quality education, or accessible healthcare. They hold the floor steady, but do not raise the ceiling. Poverty today often sits between dependence and aspiration. Families receive support, yet still seek independence. Welfare helps them stay afloat while they search for firmer ground. As we reflect on poverty and the state, the picture becomes more layered. Progress lies not in perfection, but in persistence, in systems that adapt, listen, and continue even when outcomes are slow. In this quiet conversation, welfare appears not as a solution, but as a companion, walking alongside growth, cushioning its rough edges, and reminding development that survival must come before success. Infrastructure often feels like development made visible. Roads stretch, bridges rise, wires hum quietly overhead. These structures change how far people can travel, how fast goods move, how connected daily life begins to feel. A new road shortens distance before it shortens time. It connects villages to markets, workers to jobs, patients to hospitals. Movement becomes easier, and with it, opportunity feels closer than before. Railways tell a similar story. They carry people across regions, stitching distant lives together. Journeys that once took days become manageable. Mobility expands imagination as much as geography. Power changes life in subtler ways. When electricity becomes reliable, evenings stretch longer. Children study after sunset. Work shifts indoors. Silence replaces the sound of generators. Stability settles quietly into routine. Digital connections now sit alongside physical ones. Phones, data, and networks bring services into homes. Payments travel without travel. Information arrives instantly. Distance loses some of its weight. Together, these systems enable growth. They reduce friction. They allow businesses to function, markets to widen, and services to reach farther. Infrastructure prepares the ground on which expansion can occur. Yet behind every visible structure lies a quieter story. Land must be found. Space must be cleared. Communities must adjust. Development often begins by asking some to move so others can move faster. Displacement rarely makes headlines for long. Families relocate, routines break, familiar landscapes disappear. Compensation may arrive, but belonging is harder to replace. Progress leaves marks that numbers do not record. Land acquisition carries emotion as much as paperwork. Fields hold memory. Homes hold history. When these are traded for projects, the exchange is not equal, even when it is necessary. Delays creep in quietly. Permissions take time. Disputes linger. Weather interrupts. What looks straightforward on paper becomes complicated on the ground. Infrastructure teaches patience, often the hard way. Costs also rise. Materials become expensive. Designs change. Time stretches budgets. What began as a promise becomes a negotiation between ambition and reality. These overruns are not always failures. They reflect the complexity of building at scale. But they remind us that infrastructure is not just engineering, it is coordination among people, land, and expectation. For those waiting, delays feel personal. A road not finished means another year of dust. Power not stabilized means another season of adjustment. Progress pauses even when intent remains. Infrastructure can transform regions unevenly. Areas connected early surge ahead. Others wait their turn. Development follows paths that concrete and cables create. Geography begins to matter differently. At times, infrastructure arrives before livelihoods adapt. Roads come, but jobs take longer. Connectivity improves, but services lag. Growth opens doors, but people still need time to walk through them. Infrastructure also shapes trust. When projects deliver, confidence grows. When they stall, skepticism spreads. People learn whether promises will hold. Despite challenges, infrastructure remains essential. Without it, growth struggles to reach people. Markets shrink, services thin, opportunity clusters narrowly. Infrastructure widens the stage on which development can unfold. The question is not whether to build, but how. Whether movement will include those displaced. Whether speed will allow care. Whether connection will deepen life, not just accelerate it. As we reflect on roads and wires, stations and signals, infrastructure appears less like concrete and more like choice. It decides who moves first, who waits, and how development is experienced along the way. In this quiet moment, infrastructure reminds us that progress is not only about reaching destinations. It is also about how gently we carry people while building the paths forward. As development accelerates, it quietly leans on the earth beneath it. Resources are drawn, landscapes reshaped, and balance shifts slowly at first, then more visibly. Nature absorbs pressure without complaint, until it no longer can. Water tables fall where demand rises. Rivers grow tired carrying waste, along with life. Forests thin to make space for roads and homes. Each change seems manageable alone, but together they reshape the future quietly. Pollution often arrives as a side effect, not an intention. Smoke settles into lungs. Waste settles into soil. Air and water carry traces of progress that bodies must learn to endure. For many, these changes are first felt, not measured. A cough that lingers. A summer that feels harsher. A monsoon that arrives unevenly. Climate vulnerability enters life as discomfort before it becomes concern. Communities living closer to nature feel this sooner. Farmers notice seasons slipping. Coastal families sense the sea behaving differently. Livelihoods tied to land and weather absorb shocks before markets do. Development increases exposure as well as opportunity. Cities expand into floodplains. Settlements rise along fragile edges. Growth places people closer to risk, even as it promises safety. Ecological stress rarely pauses growth. It accumulates quietly. Soil loses strength. Biodiversity thins. Systems designed to regenerate are pushed to sustain instead. Resilience fades gradually. Climate stress amplifies existing inequality. Those with fewer resources recover slower. A heat wave is harder without shelter. A flood costs more when savings are thin. Environmental strain deepens social vulnerability. Over time, the environment stops being background and becomes foreground. Disruptions interrupt routine. Recovery demands attention. Development begins to feel fragile rather than confident. This is where reflection enters law and conscience alike. Courts have occasionally reminded society that a healthy environment is inseparable from the right to live with dignity. Survival is not only biological, but humane. These observations are not warnings shouted loudly. They are reminders spoken softly. That life depends on air that can be breathed, water that can be trusted, land that can sustain. Sustainability asks development to slow its steps without stopping its journey. To notice limits before crossing them. To treat nature not as input, but as partner. Resource depletion challenges the idea of endless expansion. Extraction offers quick gains, but long debts. What is taken today must be answered for tomorrow. Urban growth intensifies this tension. Cities demand energy, materials, and space continuously. Their footprint extends far beyond their boundaries, drawing from distant forests, rivers, and fields. Pollution also follows invisible paths. It does not stay where it is produced. It travels through air and water, crossing boundaries without permission. Responsibility becomes shared, even when impact feels distant. Environmental costs often surface later. Benefits arrive quickly, consequences slowly. This delay makes trade-offs harder to see. Comfort today obscures concern for later. Development narratives have begun to acknowledge this quietly. The language shifts from control to care, from exploitation to balance, from speed to sustainability. Climate vulnerability now sits beside economic vulnerability. Both test resilience. Both ask whether systems can adapt before strain becomes damage. Sustainable development does not reject progress. It reshapes it. It asks whether growth can coexist with regeneration, whether expansion can respect limits, whether comfort can be shared without exhaustion. As this conversation deepens, environment appears not as an obstacle, but as context. It frames every choice. It supports every life. It reminds development of its dependence. In the quiet of this reflection, sustainability becomes less about sacrifice and more about continuity. About ensuring that development today does not quietly borrow against the lives of those who will follow. When development looks toward the future, it eventually turns to people themselves. Roads and machines matter, but human capital lives in minds and bodies. It grows quietly, shaping how society learns, works, and adapts over time. Education is often the first place this foundation is built, not just through years spent in classrooms, but through what is actually understood and retained. Learning quality matters more than presence alone. Many children attend school regularly, yet learning gaps persist. Reading, reasoning, and confidence develop unevenly. Some move ahead smoothly, others fall behind without being noticed. The classroom becomes shared space, but not shared progress. These gaps follow people into adulthood. Skills shape productivity, opportunity, and resilience. When learning is fragile, work becomes harder, choices narrow, and growth struggles to translate into capability. Health stands alongside education as an equal pillar. A healthy population works better, learns faster, and recovers sooner. Illness drains energy long before it drains income. Healthcare inequalities shape life chances quietly. Access varies by place, income, and awareness. Some receive early care, others arrive late. Outcomes diverge even when conditions are similar. Nutrition connects education and health in subtle ways. A well-nourished child learns more easily. A nourished worker sustains effort longer. Deficiencies rarely announce themselves loudly, but their effects linger. Productivity grows where bodies are strong and minds are prepared. It is not just effort, but efficiency. Human capital turns time into value, without exhausting people in the process. When education, health, and nutrition align, progress compounds. Learning supports work. Health supports learning. Stability supports both. Development begins to sustain itself. When they do not, growth carries strain. People work harder for less outcome. Fatigue replaces creativity. Advancement feels effortful rather than natural. Human capital is slow to build and slow to repair. Missed learning years cannot be fully recovered. Poor health leaves lasting marks. About deficiency. This makes early investment quietly decisive. Inequality deepens these patterns. Some children grow up with layered support, others with constant interruption. The distance between them widens before careers even begin. Healthcare gaps mirror this divide. Preventive care is uneven. Treatment timing varies. Recovery depends on circumstance as much as condition. Over time, these differences shape productivity at scale. Not because people try less, but because systems prepare them differently. Development reflects preparation. Human capital is not abstract. It appears in how confidently people speak, how creatively they solve problems, how steadily they work. It shapes everyday competence. Unlike infrastructure, it cannot be rushed. Learning takes patience. Health takes continuity. Nutrition takes care across generations. Progress here resists shortcuts. Growth can surge ahead temporarily without strong human capital, but it becomes fragile. Innovation slows. Adaptation weakens. Resilience thins. Long-term development rests on this quiet strength, on people capable of learning, working, and responding to change without breaking. Human capital does not demand celebration. It asks for attention. It grows when systems are steady, access is fair, and effort is respected. As we sit with this idea, development feels less mechanical and more human. Less about what is built outside, and more about what is built within. In the end, human capital reminds us that progress lasts longest when it lives in people themselves, carrying development forward long after structures fade from view. Development eventually meets governance, not in speeches, but in queues, forms, offices, and waiting rooms. This is where intentions become experiences, and where the distance between promise and delivery quietly reveals itself. Many policies begin with clarity and purpose. On paper, they flow smoothly. On the ground, they encounter people, habits, and limits. Implementation becomes the real test of development. Gaps appear not always from lack of intent, but from capacity. Institutions carry heavy responsibilities with uneven resources. Staff are stretched, systems age, and coordination becomes fragile. A good idea delayed feels different from a bad idea. When services arrive late or unevenly, trust erodes slowly. People learn to lower expectations not because they want less, but because waiting costs energy. Corruption often grows in these gaps. Where processes are unclear or discretionary, shortcuts appear. Not always dramatic, sometimes routine. Small transactions accumulate into quiet distortion. For citizens, corruption feels less like moral failure and more like friction. An extra step, an unnecessary delay, a favor asked. Development slows not because it stops, but because it detours. Governance also struggles with scale. Reaching millions requires standardization, but people live unique lives. Uniform rules meet diverse realities. Adjustment becomes difficult. Administrative reform often sounds technical, but its effects are deeply human. Clear roles reduce confusion. Simple procedures reduce fatigue. Predictable timelines reduce anxiety. Institutions work best when they are boring, when processes are smooth enough to fade into background. When people interact with the state without fear or negotiation. Technology has begun to change this texture. Digital systems reduce discretion, speed transactions, and leave trails. Services become quicker, more transparent, more reachable from home. For many, this shift feels liberating. Fewer visits, fewer intermediaries, fewer uncertainties. Access improves, even if unevenly. Technology opens doors, but does not remove all thresholds. Digital systems also introduce new divides. Comfort with technology varies. Connectivity falters. Errors feel distant and hard to explain. Inclusion becomes a moving target. Governance is not only about efficiency, it is about relationship. Whether people feel heard, whether complaints travel upward, whether feedback returns with change, institutions gain strength through consistency. When rules are applied evenly, when outcomes are predictable, when effort is rewarded with response. Weak governance magnifies inequality. Those with resources navigate complexity better. Others wait longer, give up sooner. Development becomes selective, not intentional. Reform in this sense is not dramatic overhaul. It is patient repair, fixing small leaks, aligning incentives, training people quietly. Capacity grows slowly. Experience accumulates. Trust rebuilds. Governance improves through repetition as much as innovation. The state appears most credible when it delivers without spectacle, when services arrive as expected, when systems work without explanation. As development deepens, governance must mature alongside it. Speed must be matched with care, scale with sensitivity, technology with accountability. In this quiet reflection, governance emerges not as control, but as coordination. The art of making complexity livable. Development depends not only on what is planned, but on how gently and reliably it is carried through institutions into everyday life. As growth accelerates, some things slip quietly out of view. Not because they are unimportant, but because they do not fit easily into measures of success. They remain present, felt rather than counted. Mental strain often travels alongside progress. Faster lives, longer hours, constant adjustment. People appear productive, yet feel unsettled. Rest becomes something postponed, not protected. Anxiety grows quietly where certainty thins. Jobs change. Skills age. Expectations rise. The future feels closer, but less stable. Growth promises possibility, but not always peace. Social bonds stretch under pressure. Families adapt to new routines. Communities thin as people move away. Familiar rhythms fade, replaced by efficiency. Connection becomes scheduled rather than shared. Urban life magnifies this shift. Crowds increase, yet loneliness persists. Proximity does not guarantee belonging. Growth fills spaces, but not always relationships. Cultural patterns adjust as livelihoods change. Traditions bend to accommodate schedules. Languages soften. Practices simplify. Adaptation keeps life moving, but something familiar quietly recedes. These changes are not losses to be judged, but transitions to be noticed. Culture evolves, as it always has, yet the pace of change leaves less time to reflect. Mental health remains particularly invisible. Strain hides behind routine. Fatigue blends into normality. Support arrives late, if at all. Growth rarely pauses to ask how people are coping. Children absorb these pressures early. Achievement begins to feel urgent. Play yields to preparation. Resilience becomes expectation, not nurture. Elders experience another kind of displacement. Skills valued for decades lose relevance. Authority softens. Familiar roles blur. Progress moves ahead, leaving adjustment behind. Long-term resilience depends on more than income or infrastructure. It rests on emotional stability, trust, and shared meaning. These grow slowly and weaken quietly when ignored. When shocks arrive, economic or environmental, these invisible reserves matter. Communities with strong bonds recover faster. Individuals with support endure better. Growth can strain resilience when it demands constant adaptation without rest. Change becomes routine, but recovery does not. The system moves, but people tire. Social cohesion holds space for difference. It allows disagreement without fracture. When life speeds up, patience shortens. Misunderstanding grows more easily. Cultural disruption often follows opportunity. Migration brings diversity and possibility, but also distance from roots. Belonging must be rebuilt repeatedly. These experiences do not signal failure. They signal complexity. Development touches lives deeply, rearranging more than economies. What is ignored is not gone. It waits, influencing how people respond, trust, and engage. Blind spots quietly shape outcomes. To notice them is not to reject growth. It is to deepen it, to allow development to include inner lives and shared spaces. In this quiet moment, the invitation is simple: to listen for what feels strained beneath success, to sense what may need care, even as progress continues forward. As we come back to where we began, growth stands quietly in front of us again. It matters. It brings movement, possibility, and momentum. Without it, life feels constrained. Yet on its own, growth does not tell the whole story. Progress lives in the spaces growth passes through. It asks how people feel while moving forward. Whether life becomes steadier, kinder, more breathable. These questions linger long after numbers settle. Growth can raise horizons, but progress decides how the ground feels beneath our feet. One lifts expectation. The other supports balance. Development needs both, even when they move at different speeds. In daily life, this difference is felt gently. In how work ends at night. In how safe a journey feels. In whether tomorrow feels manageable. Progress whispers where growth speaks. India's path reflects this tension, as many journeys do. Periods of acceleration sit beside moments of adjustment. Confidence coexists with caution. Movement continues, even as reflection deepens. Growth has opened doors that were once closed. It has expanded choice and visibility. At the same time, it has asked many to adapt quickly, sometimes quietly, sometimes without support. Progress asks us to notice these adaptations, not to judge them, but to understand them, to see development not only as arrival, but as experience. When growth and progress move together, development feels grounded. Expansion carries people. Change feels less exhausting. Life absorbs movement without losing shape. When they drift apart, something subtle shifts. People move faster but feel less certain. Achievement rises while reassurance lags. This space between growth and progress is not a problem to solve quickly. It is a conversation to keep returning to. A pause worth taking. Perhaps development is less about reaching a destination and more about learning how to travel without leaving too many behind. As this episode settles, there's no final answer offered here. Only a quiet invitation to notice growth around you and progress within you. To listen for what feels stronger and what still feels fragile. To allow both movement and meaning to share the same path. And in that listening, to let the question remain open.